So this batch is going to be a batch of pears. So I've been asked to take this box of pears, cube them, and freeze dry them for some testing purposes. So these are going to end up being chocolate coated, or at least some of them, for a test for a commercial purpose. It comes up occasionally, especially if I wear gloves, about why I'm wearing gloves, or sometimes in the same comments, why aren't you always wearing gloves? Wearing gloves seems to be a controversial subject, though to me it shouldn't be. Almost all the freeze drying I do is for my own purpose. I'm not sharing it, so it really doesn't matter. But some people think that I should always wear gloves when I'm prepping food, including if I'm making my own sandwich. Other people think it's ridiculous to ever wear gloves because you've washed your hands first. Wearing gloves is mostly about the mental picture of it. So if random people are touching your food during manufacturing, you want to picture them wearing gloves so that they didn't touch your food. But in reality, if your family's making you a sandwich, you don't really give it much of a thought unless they've been working on the car. I tend to wear gloves if I'm dealing with raw meats, raw eggs, things like that that might, so that I can take those gloves off when I'm in different stages of the process and not spread anything around during that process. I also do it if it's really messy or some frozen thing, so because it's cold on the hands or easier for cleaning. And of course, if I'm chopping hot peppers, I wear gloves. Let's get this batch going and see what we're going to do. So this is the box of pears I'm working on, and it actually turns out that they're a little bit more ripe than I expected. They're beautifully ripe. They're ready to eat. So I'm rinsing them off and then slicing them up. So I tried using this slicer, but these pears are actually a bit too soft already for this slicer. This would still work great for apples and of course for potatoes. So we'll probably try it again with some apples or some less ripe pears. But these pears are ready to eat right now, and so they're softer. I already have the first tray of pear cubes in the freezer for pre-freezing. So we'll continue slicing and dicing and get them into this water. This water is 2 liters, approximately 2 liters of water, and then 4 teaspoons of ascorbic acid to help keep them fresh and from turning brown at all. And then for each batch, I'm emptying the pears out, putting new water in so that there's not all those sugars in there that might turn brown. I could probably just replenish the ascorbic acid, but I don't know how much to add each time, and in the past I've been fairly unsuccessful at that. So let's get back to slicing. After washing the pear, then I'm peeling it by hand because the peeler slicer doesn't do well with a soft fruit like this. It would have worked well on it and they're still not quite ripe, but when they're nice and ripe like this, these are kind of soft for that machine. After it's peeled, try to slice it right down the middle of the core. And then I'm taking the knife and just cutting around the 2 sides of the stem because that's a harder piece, so don't want that in the final product. And then taking off the blossom end. And then using the little scoop to just scoop out that little core, because the pears tend to have a tiny little core. So that's why I use this instead of a big coring thing, because it just has a very small piece that needs to be removed. So again, the 2 sides. Okay, and now we'll get this sliced in about 1/2 inch thick. Okay, and so that gives about 1/2 inch each direction. And then I just kind of line them all up so that the starting point's about the same. And of course the edge pieces, because of the curve, aren't really cubes, but it does a pretty decent job, and we get the maximum number of pieces that are more or less a cube. and then we'll get them in the water with the ascorbic acid. And you can go this direction also, and then you do it that way, and same deal. Continue with that until we get enough to cover a tray, about 2.5 pounds per tray. And part of that would depend on which machine you have. I have the older 4-tray machine, so I go with 2.5 pounds per tray. If I had the 5-tray machine, I would go with just 2 pounds per tray. And I really think that the 5-tray one is going to do a better job because you're going to have thinner layers, and so it's going to dry more quickly. So you can see a spot right here. Of course, this video isn't about pears and growing pears, but this spot did not show through the skin. So, and it's got a kind of a punkiness to it. Generally, at least in our area, that means it was probably hit early on in its growing season. And usually in our area, that means it was hit by small hail. And it doesn't cause a problem, but it kind of leaves a scar under the skin. Next, I'm going to scoop these out of there. So I went with a pretty good size cube. These are actually fairly big, but since they're hand cut, there will be a large variety of sizes. So hopefully that will work for the testing they want to do. Okay, I'm going to put that on the scale, find out what that weighs. Okay, so kind of get those leveled out a bit. And then I will put a thermometer in these before I put them in the freezer for pre-freezing. So these are going to the regular freezer for pre-freezing. These are ready for pre-freezing. I'll get them in the freezer, get a thermometer in there, and we'll see them after we get all 4 trays, or the whole box done actually, because I'll use 2 freeze dryers if I need to, because I have access to my sister's. Okay, these are very light loads on this set of trays. These are going in my sister's machine. This is what I had left in that box, so I just spread them out on the 4 trays, even though it would easily fit on 2. The pears have been in the freezer overnight now. I could have gotten them into the freeze dryer earlier, but I really didn't, well, I wasn't ready for it. So I left them overnight, and they still took quite a few hours to get completely frozen. Now I'm going to start the freeze dryer, and then I'm going to also use my sister's freeze dryer for the smaller batch. And it's just the smaller batch because I really didn't pay attention to how many pears I was going to get, how many of the cube pieces. So I got about 5 pears or so per tray on the first set. And then for the second set, there was only 9 pears left. So I spread that out on all 4 trays. So they're pretty light loads on the second set. So I'm going to put the second set in my sister's. It'll be done first. Because it's just so little pear by comparison. And if I remember, when I get to my sister's, I will put, I'll set her tray temperature, the rack temperature, to the same as mine. I run mine at 120 degrees almost all the time. If you run it at 125 or 130, it will be a little faster, but in my experience, some of the light colored foods, the white apple slices, the pear slices, maybe the white onions, will tend to turn a little bit darker brown, or they'll collapse a little more, or in the case of sugary things, they'll expand a little bit more. So anyway, you can choose a temperature that works for you. I usually just run it at 120. So we'll get this set for 120 degrees. Well, mine is set for 120 degrees. I'll get it started. So the drain valve, we'll get the drain valve closed. We'll get it shut, and then I'm starting. Let's zoom in on that. I've mentioned this a few times. This plastic flap is just some plastic packaging that came on something, and I just put it on there because it's a touch screen. I don't want to accidentally cancel a batch, which has happened a couple of times before. Customize. and I have it set for 120 degrees, and it usually overruns by 5 to 10 degrees, so it'll usually go to 125 to 130 by the time it evens out. But I've got it set for 120, and start customize, and continue. It's about 65 degrees down here where my machine is, so it won't take a real long time for this to chill. I'll wait till it's colder than the food that's in the freezer, which is about -5 right now. I did a quick check, and then we'll get them into the freeze dryer. I'm not going to put them in there when it's warmer than the food, because that's just going to thaw them out a bit before it has a chance to get cold enough. And then I'm going to make sure that it's down to about 40 below before I continue to the next step. And with the older model, I can just simply add time on the fly. And with my sister's machine, I'm probably going to run the cooling in the test mode to make sure that food gets all the way down to -40 before I let it go to the next cycle. So let's go get my sister's machine started next. So we're going to change the temperature profile on my sister's machine. So I'm just hitting customize. So on hers, she has it set for the initial freeze of 0, extra freeze time of 2 hours, the dry temperature at 120, extra dry time at 12 hours. And the dry mode is normal. So save. And on this one, this time, I'm going to actually go into the testing mode and just get the freezer running so that I can get it all the way cold the way I want it. So freeze on, and we'll get this closed up. Oh, I want to check this. We'll get this closed up and come back when it's nice and cold in there. And then we'll get things loaded. I forgot to mention that for my sister's machine, this is batch 151, and we haven't changed the oil in 70 batches. We're going for 100 on this one, so I'll bring the camera close and we can see the oil through the hole. That's what the oil looks like now after 70 batches. So when people say that they're having stuff get in their oil, I honestly don't understand it. You can see that is still just as clear as can be in there. So we've changed it twice before, and both times it came out just as clear as it went in. I mean, that's okay, that's a wrong way to say it. It's not cloudy. It does have a very slight yellow tint to it, but that's all. So the vacuum levels are getting just as low, just as fast. So we're seeing no degradation of the oil that we can measure. The look of it is just clear as can be still. Anyway, at this point, we're going for 100 batches on this set. Only have 30 more to go before it's 100 batches on that oil, and it still looks perfect. Now we'll go get the fruit, get it weighed, and put it in there. And the weighing on this one, since I'm not going to be keeping it and storing it, probably really doesn't matter, but it's kind of the way I do it, so I'm going to do it on this one also.
Yeehaw!
We've got the weights on those. We'll get that open and get them in. We'll take that out of there. The thermometers in the food are showing about 10 degrees. So it's quite cold to begin with. And I'm going to put the freeze off. And then we'll just run it like a normal batch and come back and check it when it's time for the dry check. And then we'll make sure that it's completely dry by doing that dry check before we bag it. So now we'll go back to my machine and get that set going. So get these weighed real quick, and these are quite heavy trays. 1848, and I have to subtract out the thermometer because I forgot to weigh them before I stuck that in there. It's one of the reasons I don't like freezing them with it in there. Okay, so those are about 0 degrees as it's starting out. They stayed nice and cold, and it's pre-chilled real well. It's kind of the best possible conditions for them. So we'll let that go. And this is a fairly big load, a little more than 10 pounds, I think. So this is going to take probably the full 2 days or 40 hours or so at the temperature that I've got it set. Of course, you can make it go a little faster by raising the temperature, as I mentioned before. But I like this temperature. If anything, it might be nice to have it lower so that they stay nice and bright. We'll find out how they do, and we'll be back in a couple days to check them and start the dry check process. So don't go away, it'll be just a second. So I'm back to my sister's machine, and it's time to check it to see if it's dry yet. And of course, we're just starting the dry check, so this is part 1 of 2, assuming it doesn't lose any weight. Otherwise, there will be a part 3. And interestingly, the middle 2 trays are only up to 110 degrees. I thought they'd be over 120, and I thought they'd have been over that for a while now. But they've kind of stalled at 110. So I don't think that it got changed on the temperature, but it may be just that there's so little mass there that it's not swinging past as far as it usually does. I'm not really sure why. Anyway, I've already added a little extra time because I couldn't get back to it to do the process on time. So when I looked at it before and saw that it was in the last half hour, I gave it a couple more hours. And it's still at 110 a couple hours later. So I assume it's been dry for a while, but we don't just guess, we test. So let's get it out of there and check. So I'm going to bypass the rest of the time. Then we'll open the drain valve. Get that, and starting with tray 1. And I will rotate the positions just like I normally do. So tray 1, 751, and tray 2 is going to go up. This one will come down a spot. So tray 2, 751 also. Tray 3, and I'll put tray 4 right up. 734. And tray 4. That's only 80 degrees at this point. 737. And some of these did turn brown a little bit on the outside, and I suspect it's because I got lazy on that last batch and I didn't drain the water with the ascorbic acid and put a fresh batch in. So because I had more fruit than normal in that batch, it just didn't have enough ascorbic acid left to do the job. Yeah, from feeling it, there's no way to tell. That's not a good method to test to see if your food is dry. Okay, it's back in there. So with the drain valve closed, we'll add more dry time. Continue. And I'll put 3 hours in case I can't make it back in 2 hours. So we'll come back in 2 or 3 hours and check to see if they lost any weight. If they don't lose any weight during that time, that means they're already dry. And I suspect they are. They should be. It's had enough time for such a light load. It's been about 26 hours, and for such a light load, a single layer of pieces, it's probably done. But I don't bag probably. I bag we're sure. Okay, so we'll be back in a little while. So it's been about 2.5 hours since we restarted this for the dry check. Now we'll take them out and check them. The top tray is showing 90 degrees. The second one about 110, about 110, and about 105. So the ones that were the top and bottom are now in the middle, and they are up to the temperature of the other ones. I find it, again, interesting that they only showed up to about 110 instead of 120. And I suspect it's because of the smaller batch size, so the tray isn't soaking up as much heat. So it's turning off the heater before it transfers as much heat into it. It just doesn't have as much mass. And I just came over from my place and my freeze dryer, and it's, of course, way behind this one. This one was started first, and it has such a small load in it that mine's simply going to take a lot longer. Mine is over 10 pounds. Its trays are showing between 0 and 20 degrees right now. So it's got a long time to go. I didn't expect it to be done today. This, I'm not at all surprised it's done, or probably done. Let's bypass the rest of the time with the down arrow. Get them out and check them. Okay, as soon as the pressure's equalized, we'll be able to get them out to check. So starting with tray 1. Okay, 7:51. So no change in 2.5 hours. Tray 2, no change. Tray 3, no change. Tray 4, no change. I'm going to get this turned off with no defrost, so I can get these thermometers out and we can get the final weights of those. And the ones that have the holes in them, I'm not going to leave on the tray. So I'm not going to bag the piece of fruit with the hole in it, because for this purpose, that would be a problem piece. So I've got a couple of trays worth in the one bag. I'm using a large bag. I'm not going to push the air out. I will add an oxygen absorber, but I'm going to leave it quite full of air so that it does not squish the pears. These are camise pears. They're very soft. They're very sugary. They're kind of like cotton candy made out of pears. And so if I collapse the bag, they will end up squishing the pears and sticking together. So instead, I'm going to leave it full of air, put the oxygen absorber in, and seal it, leaving it as puffy as I can. And that's one reason I'm leaving it so empty. So those are pretty close to the same, about 127 each. So as I said, I'm not going to push the air out of these. I'm going to make sure that they're basically as full of air as I can. This would be a good time to have a nitrogen system and puff these up like a balloon, because I do not want these to get crushed. So I need to add the oxygen absorber still. Okay, well, we'll get those sealed. Yeah, I'm hoping I left enough air in those. And then I'm going to kind of shake them this way so that they're not stacked on top of each other, so they're even less likely to stick together. Okay.
Taxi!
Okay, so that's how I'm going to store this set. We're going to use some of these to do our own chocolate testing. These other ones, I'm going to kind of shake them a little bit, and hopefully the oxygen absorber or the amount of air in there will be enough to actually cushion the pears. So we'll be back tomorrow to do the other batch out of my machine. So the pear is finished just a few minutes ago, probably about 15 minutes ago, but I wasn't here. And this is where the thermometers help out, because otherwise I would have no idea of what the temperature of the actual pears are. And I can tell that it's 60 degrees, about 90 degrees, about 85 degrees, and about 80 degrees. So they're right on the border. If they cooled down anymore, I wouldn't take them out for the first part of the dry check. So we'll get them out real quick and get them right back in for the dry check. Open the drain valve. So with the pressure equalized, we'll go ahead and get it open. So tray 1 and 929. Tray 2, 924. And we'll switch the positions of those. Put tray 2 up on the top, and tray 1 will come down a spot. Okay, tray 3, 909, and tray 4. And that one, the tray is getting cold already, 932. So we'll put these back up, and tray 4 will go up a spot. And that's the one that has some of the pear cubes with the skins on them still, so we can compare them. And tray 3 will come down a spot. And I told the person that I'm doing these for that the pears that I've done before that I've left the peel on, that unlike apples, I was really unhappy with the pear skins on them. So we always peel our pears. Got the drain valve closed. We'll add more dry time. Drain valve is closed. Continue. Pump is cold enough. Bump it up to 3 hours in case I'm not here in 2. So we'll be back in 2 or 3 hours to double check them. And I could tell from that display for the pump cooling portion of it that it had been off for 27 minutes. And so that's how far they had dropped in temperature in the 27 minutes. We'll be back in a couple hours to check it out, so don't go away, it'll be just a second. I'm back to check it. It's been about 2 hours and 20 minutes, so we'll bypass the last 40 minutes of the 3 hours that I gave it because I made it back this time. Okay, we'll get the drain valve opened. As soon as the pressure is equalized, we'll be able to get them out and check them. So I know I've mentioned this at least once or twice, but I'm sure I don't mention it enough. I don't care what the weight is. I'm just looking at, did it change? Did it go down from the last time? So you don't have to weigh the foods at all, except I would weigh them at this point to check to make sure that they've stopped losing moisture, stopped losing weight because of water loss. The other weight for the total amounts, if you don't care how much you put in a bag, if you don't care how much you're storing, it doesn't really matter. So this is the only one that matters, and I don't care what the weight is. I just want to know, did it change from last time? When we originally started doing our dry check process of weighing, we just used a piece of scratch paper or a Post-it note and then threw it away after the end of the batch. I only started tracking everything on a form because so many people asked to see what we were tracking and asked why. Anyway, pressure's equalized. Let's get them out and check them. Starting at tray 1. Okay, and no change. So it's been 2 hours, what did I say? 2 hours and 40? 2 hours and 20. 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think, and no change. And no change. And that's the number we're looking for, is no change. These have about 175 grams of fruit on the trays. 1 3/4 grams would be 1%. So it'd still be a very small amount. But we're really going for no change. 909, no change. And finally, tray 4. All right, no change. So we can stop the machine with no defrost, make it much quieter. So the time showing on here is about 52 hours, 50 minutes. And we know that it was already dry before we checked it this first time. So it was dry about 2 hours and 20 minutes ago or so. So we can back that time up at least a couple hours. So we know it was done before about 50.5 hours. I'll write that time on there for future reference, that it was about 50.5 hours, and know that it was probably less. So this batch took about 32.22 kilowatt hours to finish. So I'm going to get this started defrosting so I get it ready for the next batch. I'm planning to have the next batch will be the beef stew Mexican style that we started a while ago. So we have enough for, I think, 3 or 4 freeze dryer loads waiting to be started. So I'll probably use my sister's again to get a few of them done and out of the freezer right away, if she's not using her freeze dryer for anything on the moment that I show up. Whoever gets there first. So we're going to remove the thermometers and get the final weights on all these. Now for these, I do not want to bag the ones that have the holes in them, because people wonder, why do they have a hole in them? So these become snacks. I'm sure I mentioned this before, but I'm bagging the ones with the peel left on them in separate bag to keep those completely separate for other research. And those might not be a problem if they were chocolate coated, but I don't like the mouthfeel of the peel. And as I did before, I'm going to over-bag them as far as size goes. I'm going to use a bag that's actually bigger than required for normal use, because I don't want these to get crushed together at all, because they're very soft. Pears have so little structure to them, they will just crush. They'll stick together because of the sugariness. So I just want to put them in fairly big bags. So I'm using a 2-quart bag, even though this would normally only require like a 1-quart bag. I don't want them squished together. Wow, it just leaves a lot of sugars on the paper. Okay, so you can see that's probably only half full, but that's what I want for this set to make sure that they don't get crushed. I'm just going to fill these bags about halfway, so I've got the information on the label about this particular set. And I'm not even sure if I should be breaking every one of these apart from each other or not, because I don't really know how they're going to be used. So I could see reasons to break them apart, but as I said, I'm not sure that it's necessary for the use that they're going to be going through. I'll aim for about 130 grams per bag. And again, that's about halfway, a little bit more of the volume than a halfway. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to push the bag open, and I'm going to carefully try to fold the top so that I keep it as full as possible. So kind of the opposite of what I would normally do of pushing out extra air. And I'll leave that closed until we come back and get the oxygen absorber in. But right now I want to get everything bagged. So if you've been watching for a while, you know that mostly I use quart bags, pint bags, and occasionally a 2-quart bag. So these are all bagged in gallon bags and 2-quart bags. They're not going to be used by us, so they can be in a bigger bag, because once they're open, they should be gone quickly, because this is just for some testing purposes. Normally I use smaller bags, but different size bags have their place. Even 5-gallon bags could be very useful. If I were going on some kind of trip, I might take a bunch of my quart bags and pint bags. I could use a thinner bag even, and put them into a bigger 5-gallon bag and store them that way. This could be for week 1, and this bag could be for week 2, and so on. So I could, and that would keep them safe and watertight and everything. So I could see great uses for different size bags. You have to decide what bag size works for you. Now we'll get oxygen absorbers in these and get them sealed. So to keep it simple, I'm just using my regular 300cc oxygen absorbers, but I'm going to put 2 in each of these bigger bags and then 1 in the smaller bags. We've already shown with the testing that especially for short-term use, the fact that these will only be around for months, not years, maybe even weeks and not years, they only need to absorb the oxygen that's in here, and then maybe a slight amount that may come in the future. It's not like the ones that I'm putting on the shelf for 20 years or 10 years. They need to be able to keep absorbing oxygen for years as it comes in. So anyway, these aren't the same issue. I know that 2 of the 300s is plenty for these gallon ones for the time and purpose I'm using them for. Normally I'd probably use a 500 for these, unless I was squishing the extra air out. So I'm going to move them over, so I'm dealing with 1 at a time so that I don't lose my place. So I'll drop 2 in there, and I'm making sure that the bag stays full of air. I'm not squishing it out. If I had a nitrogen tank, I would inject nitrogen in there and blow it up like a balloon. And I guess I could use my compressor again, but I don't have it down here, and the nozzle isn't cleaned, and so many issues with somebody else's stuff instead of my own. Finally, we'll get these sealed, and I'm still sealing these at the top in case they need to be opened and resealed. I know that the place that they're going has sealers, so it won't be an issue if they need to reseal them. And then I'll finish filling out the weight before drying by just doing the calculation and adding that on there in case they want to know. And these are some of our older pointy bags. I definitely like the newer ones that have rounded corners. There's no danger on ending up with poking another bag with it. And if I were putting these in our bins, I would round all these corners. That's it with these, except that I will kind of put them on their side and shake them a little bit so that they're not a clump at the bottom, because I'm still afraid that they're going to collapse enough and squish those sugary pears together. I did that with the past set also, and they seem nice and loose still inside. So I definitely would blow these up like a balloon with nitrogen if I could. So that's all for this set. Next set should be beef stew Mexican style. We did a giant batch of it, well, 5 batches of it, and each batch gets about 6 or 7 pounds. So we've got quite a bit of it to freeze dry. Right now it's in the freezer, and we'll be getting to that on the next set. So thanks for watching and following along. Just coating a few of the little pear pieces, and the bigger the chunk, the better they do as far as the overall flavor and mouthfeel and experience. Because if it's too small, then there's just not enough pear for this particular chocolate. That might not be true for all chocolate. This is just dark chocolate chips that I melted, because I tried some other chocolate and it didn't set up at room temperature. That has to be a little cooler. So I was using just some dark chocolate chips and then just shaking it off a bit to end up with a thin coating, thinner coating. Then just tipping it out and letting it harden. Anyway, the chocolate should help keep the pear away from moisture, or the moisture away from the pear. So that should keep the pear chunk from rehydrating and getting soft and chewy. And kind of checking it to make sure it is all the way coated. And it was easier to dip them out earlier when it was much more full. But I completely forgot about recording any of that. I mean, it's not like it's exciting or difficult. I could probably use a fork or something like that instead of 2 toothpicks. That's my test of pears, and because this isn't tempered chocolate or anything like that, I'm going to get bloom on there, and so the white coloring, and that's not going to affect the taste of it. So for this test, that's plenty good. That's pretty good. Hopefully I remember to start the recording. Hey, I did.